The sun hung low over the Texas plains, its orange fire stretching across endless miles of dry land. James Harrow rode slowly toward the settlement, his hat tipped low to block the glare. His horse kicked up little clouds of dust that drifted and vanished in the still, heavy air. Life on the ranch had turned quiet, too quiet. Since his brothers never returned from the war, the house felt like a hollow echo, a place built for laughter that no longer came. He needed help. Someone to tend the kitchen, to keep the house alive, but what he truly needed was something he couldn't name. The settlement was alive with chatter that day, filled with weary travelers and hopeful settlers stepping off wagons. James dismounted, tall and rugged, the kind of man people moved aside for out of respect more than fear. His eyes swept over the crowd until they landed on her, a woman standing slightly apart from the others. She was not what most men would call beautiful. Her frame was soft, her dress plain and faded, and the summer heat had brought a flush to her round cheeks. But her eyes, quiet, steady, brown like river mud, carried a strange kind of strength. She was clutching a cast iron pan like it was a treasure, and beside her was a small wooden chest, her only belonging. Her name was Clara May. She had lost her family to the drought back east and had traveled alone for nearly a month, hoping to start again in this harsh land. The other settlers whispered as she passed, their voices low and cruel, about her weight, her worn shoes, her hopeful eyes. But she didn't speak back. She just stood, patient and proud in her silence. When James finally approached her, she looked startled, as if men like him didn't often stop to talk to women like her. "You cook?" he asked, his voice rough from the wind. For a moment, she hesitated, then lowered her eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "No one loves a fat girl, sir," she said softly, "but I can cook." Something in her tone, not bitterness, but quiet honesty, made him pause. For the first time in years, James Harrow smiled. The days that followed blended into one another, long, golden afternoons and cool, quiet nights on the open plains. Clara moved through the ranch house like someone trying not to be seen, yet her presence changed everything. The air began to smell of fresh bread and roasted herbs instead of dust and silence. James Harrow found himself listening for the soft clatter of pots, the low hum of her voice as she cooked. The other ranch hands noticed too. They started lingering around the kitchen window, pretending to fix tools or fetch water just to catch the scent of her biscuits or hear her laugh, a laugh that sounded shy, but warm enough to soften even the roughest day. Still, Clara kept her distance from James. When he entered the room, she would lower her gaze and busy her hands, always polite, never bold. She seemed to believe she didn't deserve to be looked at, much less spoken to kindly. But James noticed everything, the care she took in folding the linens, the small cross she carved into each loaf of bread, the way her fingers trembled slightly when she handed him his coffee. One evening, dark clouds rolled over the hills. The wind howled through the fences, and thunder cracked like gunfire. James and his men worked through the night to save what they could, cattle panicking in the rain, fences snapping, water flooding the barn. By dawn, the ranch was half ruined, and James was soaked to the bone, mud caked on his boots, his muscles aching. When he finally stumbled inside, Clara was waiting. The fire was already burning bright, and a pot of stew simmered on the stove, filling the room with the rich scent of comfort. Without a word, she handed him a towel and motioned for him to sit. He did. The first spoonful of stew nearly made him sigh out loud. As he ate, Clara quietly took his torn sleeve and began mending it by the firelight. Her stitches were neat, her touch gentle. "Ain't much I can give, sir," she murmured, eyes fixed on the thread, "but I can make sure you never go hungry again." James looked at her then. Really looked, and for the first time, hunger meant something deeper than food. The storm passed, leaving behind a world washed clean. The ranch, though battered, still stood, fences could be rebuilt, crops could be replanted. But something unseen had shifted too, like the land itself had breathed and settled differently. James stepped outside that morning, the smell of wet earth heavy in the air. The sky was pale and wide, streaked with silver light. From the porch, he could see Clara in the yard, her skirt brushing the grass as she fed the chickens from a tin bucket. Strands of hair had escaped her braid, catching the sunlight, and for the first time, James noticed the grace in her movements, unhurried, steady, full of quiet care. He watched her for a while, leaning on the porch post, trying to understand the strange warmth that rose in his chest. He had spent years surrounded by men who spoke little and felt even less, where life was measured in acres and cattle, not in smiles or soft words. But Clara had brought something to the ranch that no one else could, a sense of home. The kind that came not from walls or wealth, but from presence. When she looked up and caught him watching, she froze, a little embarrassed. "I'll make breakfast soon, sir," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. James stepped forward, shaking his head. "Clara," he said quietly, "you don't need to call me, sir." She blinked, confused. "It's proper," she murmured. "Maybe," he said, "but it don't feel right anymore." He paused, the wind tugging at his hat brim. "You said no one loves a fat girl," he continued, his voice low but firm, "but I reckon those folks never had sense enough to know what real love looks like." Clara's lips parted slightly, and for a moment, she didn't breathe. James took another step closer, his eyes soft. "You said you can cook," he added, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Then I reckon I'll never starve, not in this life." The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was full. The chickens clucked, the sun climbed higher, and Clara laughed, a sound rich and bright as the morning itself. In that small, tender moment, the lonely ranch finally felt like home.